Hello and welcome again. Now regarding contract, subcontract, and purchase order. What is the difference? And here, as we saw in the previous lecture, we have an employer or the owner or the client, and he needs to hire an engineer to do the design. And he needs to hire an engineer also to do the supervision. So this employer has to issue a contract to this engineer, a contract to the engineer for the design or the supervision, or both of them. So an employer can have a contract with a design consultant and another contract with a supervision consultant, and he will use the contract also for his like contractual relationship with a contractor. So employer to engineer, they will have a contract. Employer to a contractor, they will also have a contract. Now, there is something called the form of contract. And previously we discussed the types of contracts, the fixed rate contract and the cost reimbursable contract, time and materials, and all these. These are types of contract. But here, which form of contract he can use? There are many like popular forms of contract, but the most popular ones are the FIDIC forms of contract. And a form of contract, it's how the contract looks like and what are the clauses being agreed upon inside this contract. So this is what we call a form of contract. So the employer with the engineer can use the FIDIC white book, and with the employer with contractor, he can use FIDIC red book. So these two forms of contract will work here in this contractual relationship, employer to engineer or employer to contractor. Now, the contractor has a contract to do this project. And as we said, he needs suppliers and he needs subcontractors in order to be able to finish this project. So in that case, this contractor has a contract with the employer, okay? But he needs to have an agreement also with a subcontractor to either install or supply and install something in this project. And this is where the subcontract will come into picture. The contractor will have a subcontract agreement with this subcontractor for the installation or supply and the installation of something. And the form of agreement that can be used here, actually it can be drafted, or like some contract manager will draft this based on any other form of contract. Like he can take the form of contract of the FIDIC red book, which is the agreement between contractor and employee, and he can like simplify it, because the contract here between employer and the contractor is with very big value of money. So many conditions and terms should be there in the contract, and that's why they go for FIDIC red book. But the contractual relationship between the contractor and the subcontractor in terms of amount is a bit smaller, and it doesn't need that kind of complicated form of contract. So they go for a like handmade contract, we say, which is a contract that can be drafted by the contract manager who works here in the contracting company, and it keeps developing over time. Like the contractor will agree in this project with a subcontractor for a certain scope, terms and the conditions and everything, and something will happen in between. Some problem happened, and that problem was not covered in the subcontract agreement that they had between each other. So the contract manager who works here will learn from this, and in the next project he will try to add this clause to the contract to bind the subcontractor more. So that's how the subcontract agreement will keep developing and improving every time the same scope is awarded again. And actually, this takes us to the experience of the contract engineer or the contract manager who works here. That's why companies are always looking for experienced contracts manager to hire them. Why? Because they will have the experience. Like whenever they are doing a subcontract agreement for, let's say, fall ceiling, or for the tile installation or block installation or MEP, supply and the installation, or aluminum and the glazing, joinery, all these things, an experienced contract manager will know in each of these contracts what are the critical clauses that should be there, and he will make sure that they are there to avoid any problems between the contractor and the subcontractor, because in the end, this will affect only the performance of the project. So we use a subcontract agreement between a subcontractor and a contractor. But now a contractor wants just to supply some materials. He wants to buy something. So for buying something only, supply only, there is no any installation involved. There is no need for a subcontract agreement for that. A purchase order will be enough. So the contractor will just issue to the supplier a purchase order. And we will see what is a purchase order, what is the definition. But for the time being, we need to know that employer to engineer is a contract, employer to contractor is a contract, contractor to a subcontractor is a subcontract, contractor to a supplier is a purchase order, and actually supplier to factory also purchase order, like how this supplier is buying the materials from the factory via purchase order, because it is only a purchase. He is just buying it. And the factory is also buying the raw materials with a purchase order, because there is no any installation part included. So we use a subcontract whenever there is a main contract and we are outsourcing part of the works, so we use a subcontract. If we are just buying something, purchasing something, we will be using a purchase order. So definition of a contract, subcontract, and purchase order. A contract is a written agreement concerning employment, sales, or tenancy that is intended to be enforceable by law. This is the definition of a contract. It's a written agreement concerning employment, sales, or tenancy, or as we said, like the relationship between the employer and the consultant, or the employer and the contractor. So all these things will come under contract. But the subcontract is a written agreement concerning employment of a firm or person outside one's company to do work as part of a larger project. So because here the contractor has this full scope, he needs someone to do part of this scope. So he will go for a subcontract, because this is a part of a larger project. But the purchase order is just an official document that buyers send to sellers to document the sale of products and services to be delivered. So here, contractor to supplier, he will just issue him a purchase order. Supplier to factory, again, purchase order, because these are only purchases. So that's all regarding contracts, subcontracts, and purchase order. We now understand for which relationship, which type of these agreements we will be using, and I'll see you in the next lecture.